Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Steve.
Everybody say hello, Rachel. Hey, Rachel. Everybody say hi, Rachel. All right. All right. Today is our first day to start singing some Christmas carols. Yay, yay, yay. And how many of y'all have already decorated for Christmas? All right. All right. Okay. We're going to start off with angels, and then we're going to go right into Hark the Herald Angels Sing. All right. Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strains. Gloria in excelsis Deo. Gloria in excelsis Deo. Shepherds, why this jubilee? Why your joyous strains prolong? What the gladsome tidings be, which inspire your heavenly song? Gloria in excelsis Deo. Gloria in excelsis Deo. Come to Bethlehem and see Christ whose birth the angels sing. Come adore on bended knee Christ the Lord, the newborn King. Gloria in excelsis Deo. Gloria in excelsis Deo. Good job. Hark the herald angels sing.
Two today.
Two today, two today.
Special.
That's my English accent, all right. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. Joyful all ye nations rise, join the triumph of the skies. With angelic hosts proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Hail the heaven-born Prince of Peace, for us to do. I didn't give Julie the music, so y'all just sing a cappella with me, okay? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Julie's always wanted to fill in for Louise, so we appreciate her being here today.
Yes, we do want to.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank y'all so much.
Appreciate it. All right.
Sweet 16.
Yeah.
Never forget.
Speaking of Louise, I talked to her the other night, and she's, if you haven't heard, is still in pain, but she's got a brace, but she's doing better. She's glad to be home, and she will take phone calls and visitors if you call first, so she can be ready for you if you come. So just don't show up at her door. Okay, all right.
You call first to call her?
Do what? Yes, you call first to call her.
I know, you know.
I'm sorry. I've used my English accent. I don't know what that was. Okay, all right. So the trivia question for today is a two-parter. So you have to get both parts right, and you only get one guess. One guess. Okay. 2 parts, 1 guess. So you have to raise your hand. The #1 top Christmas songs, the top secular song, the top sacred song. Secular, sacred. What do you think they are? Linda?
Silent Night and All Over for Christmas.
Nope. Debbie?
White Christmas and Jingle Bells.
Nope.
Those are both secular.
I know.
World, girl.
Sorry.
No?
White Christmas and Silent Night?
Yeah. White Christmas and Silent Night are the 2 top songs, so appreciate that. Just a quick poll of something that might be happening in the spring. Julie and Laura have been talking about planning a trip to Sight and Sound. We've been talking about it and talking about it. So we figured out that the best route to go is sometime in the spring, like April or May. That way the weather is definitely good. Up in Pennsylvania, Sight and Sound, it's a Christian theater up there, and they do all types of amazing productions and everything. But we're choosing to go by cars, so because a bus, we're not gonna take this bus. And so that's something that we're thinking about. So if that's something that you would like to go, or maybe even would like to drive, please let me know afterwards.
How many hours is it roughly?
5.5 from here. Okay.
Oh, where is it in Pennsylvania?
Lancaster?
Lancaster?
That's only 5.5
That's
hours.
what Laura says.
Oh, because it takes me 6 to get to Somerset. 6 hours.
Yep. Okay. Donna. By the way, who brought the candy cane things? Angel. Angelique. Thank you, Angelique.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, that's my joke. I would have said, well, I can't see real well, so I would have been fumbling through wondering, well, okay, I must have left it at home. Okay. All right, a man who just died delivered to a local mortuary wearing an expensive, expertly tailored black suit. The female blonde mortuary, I always say that, hard to say that word, asked the deceased wife how she would like the body dressed. She points out that the man does look good in the black suit he is already wearing. The widow, however, says that she always thought her husband looked best in blue, and that she wanted him to have a blue suit. She gives the blonde whatever.
Mortician.
Who?
Mortician.
Mortician, thank you. Mortician, yeah. my eyes and my mouth don't work. A blank check and says, I don't care what it costs, but please have my husband in blue suit for the viewing. The woman returns the next day for the wake. To her delight, she finds her husband dressed in a gorgeous blue suit with a subtle chalk stripe. The suit fits him perfectly. She says to the mortician, whatever this costs, I wanted you to be part of it. The cost, I'm very satisfied. How much did you spend? There's no charge, the blonde mortician said. No, really, I must compensate you for the cost of this beautiful blue suit. Honestly, ma'am, the blonde said, it cost nothing. You see, a deceased gentleman of about your husband's size was brought in shortly after you left yesterday, and he was wearing an attractive blue suit. I asked his wife if she minded him going to his grave wearing a black suit instead, and she said, it's made no difference as long as he looked nice, so I just switched heads. There was a blonde. You didn't hear the last? You didn't hear it at all?
No, that last part. He got it.
Yeah, you have to read it all over again.
That's a good one.
All right. Did you know that chopping down of the Christmas tree represents the death of Christ, and putting it back up represents the resurrection of Christ? Did you know that the posts we hang are never-ending circles that represent eternity? Candy canes were made to look like shepherd hooks, and the color red, Jesus' blood, white, purity. The gifts represent the 3 gifts the wise men brought for baby Jesus. So when you're running around trying to find the perfect gift, stop yourself, take a deep breath, and remember, we have been given the perfect gift. Jesus Christ was given to us to remove all of our sins. And a couple of little short ones here. Forget the times of trouble, but not the truth they taught. Forget the days of sorrow, but not the strength they brought. Forget the storms you battle through beneath a heavy load, but not the light that led you safely down the unknown road. So, never be a prisoner of your past. If so, it's just a lesson, not a sentence.
Thank you. I did not see that punchline coming. That's a good joke. Good one. Thank you for warming up this cold room, Miss Donna. We've been fighting the boiler for a bit now.
Who's winning?
Boiler's winning so far. So, it just reminds me of that part in the Christmas story where the furnace just keeps going with that. Someone steals the turkey, all that. So.
Too bad my husband wasn't still living, he was a boiler technician.
Oh, really? Well, maybe he has some kind of manual laying around the house or something.
No, he's passed away. Did you hear that, Phil?
Yeah, sure. I'm saying even if he has just like, if there was leftover manual somewhere around the house, maybe that helps out. But we will survive these days. It's not too bad outside as long as you stay pretty dry, pretty mild day. Good to see the crowd out today. You know how rain is sometimes. Like, I wonder if people are going to brave the elements, but you guys did, so I appreciate you coming out. And also, if you're joining us online, we appreciate you joining us as well. We are going through studies of the life of Elijah. We're on the 3rd week of that. It's been a couple weeks since we talked about Elijah. Last time we got together was the week of Veterans Day, and it timed out pretty well because the topic of the week was boot camp at the Kerith Ravine. And so that's where we left. Elijah was there at the Kerith Ravine, and he was there receiving his sustenance from his environment. Actually, the ravine itself was his water, and then what brought him bread? You guys remember? Ravens brought typically selfish creatures bringing food to this prophet of God. Obviously, God was in control of the circumstance. But then the ravine dries up because we know there was a drought in the land that Elijah himself prayed for. So the guy's just kind of shooting himself in the old foot. But he's doing it on purpose because he's trying to get the attention. God has sent Elijah as a prophet to get the attention of a couple who were in the throne room, Ahab and Jezebel, who are essentially trying to destroy all of the prophets of God and the Jewish people especially. So, with the water drying up, Kerith Ravine is not a good spot to be, and so boot camp is over at Kerith Ravine. And typically, so I've been told, I've not had military experience, many of you have, and know people who have. When you go through boot camp, the next thing that you go into is some type of specialty training, right? Wherever you're going to focus your military career on, infantry or something like that. And so you get sent to a specialized training that will be the rest of your training, I believe. This is the kind of thing that we see happening with Elijah now. This camp, the next camp that you move into, in some ways is harder because you're not told everything to do. It's more putting your skills to the test. And so it can be much more demanding for you. And the point of that is so it prepares you for the demands of war. That's really what the point of boot camp is, but specifically if you have a specialized skill that you're being trained in, you need to be able to do that skill in high pressure. And so that's what these other elements of specialized training are trying to prepare you for. Well, as we already mentioned, Elijah has been at the ravine and it's dried up, but that's only the beginning of Elijah's training. He's learning to trust God, the big picture, trusting God there at the ravine. But then there's going to be more things that I think Elijah's going to pick up in the next phase of where God's going to send him. God had plans for Elijah that would take him far beyond the days of isolation and quiet meditation. If you think about, after a while, I'm not exactly sure. I don't think Scripture says exactly how long Elijah was at the ravine. I'm guessing it would have been months. And if you guys know or see anything differently, let me know. But it would have been enough time, I believe, that he probably would have gotten himself into a little bit of a routine. You know, it's like, okay, now's about the time for the ravens to show up with the bread. And and he had this time to himself, right? Because we know that Elijah's not in a public place for good reason. He's probably a public enemy. There are folks who are looking for him because he's the one that predicted the drought. And so now that the drought is going on, he's the guy that everybody wants to find so that however he started the drought, he can use that ability to end the drought. But he's been isolated. And he's had life beside the brook with the birds catering his meals, and he's gotten himself into a routine. But now, Zarephath, where he's going to go, is going to take him to the next level of relying on God in a couple of ways, pretty remarkable ways that we're going to see in the weeks ahead. So because of the historical account of 1 Kings, we're able to watch Elijah's training from a distance and learn from it. Our goal in looking at Elijah's example is to make application based on what he's learned and experienced onto our life and the circumstances we experience. We obviously are not experiencing a drought, but we do experience times where we wonder if God is looking after us or taking care of us. And so some of the examples that we'll see in the text as we move forward in Elijah's life will help us in those circumstances. So here we are, 1 Kings 17. We're going to start in verse 8, and we're going to move from Kerith Ravine over to Zarephath. Verse 8, Then the word of the Lord came to him, Elijah, Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So we did this already when we looked at the Kerith Ravine. The meaning of each of the words kind of gives us a little bit of a foreshadowing or meaning behind the location that we find these people going to. We're going to do the same thing here. Zarephath is a Hebrew word which means to melt or smelt. In the noun form, the word can be used as crucible. Crucible, C-R-U-C-I-B-L-E. Crucible. Probably gotten its name from a smelting plant or some area that was working with metal. We don't know exactly where it came from, but the place actually became a crucible for Elijah to be refined in. So crucibles are used to heat up materials, metal, and to purify them with heat. And this is the kind of thing that we see happening with Elijah through the circumstances he's going to find himself in. So God sent Elijah to the Kerith ravine to make him trust him completely. Now it's time for even deeper trust that God's going to push him to. God wants to mold or maybe melt Elijah into the man God needs him to be for the work he still has in store for him on the way. So crucibles create Christ-likeness. Crucibles create Christ-likeness. Or in James it talks about how perseverance develops character. Same idea. It's through those times of testing that we not only see the measure of character we have, but we also develop or increase the measure of character we have as we navigate those difficult times in the right direction. There's a neat little section there where Swindoll kind of shares a little personal experience in the chapter. It's on page 45 in the book. He said, after I graduated from high school, I worked in a machine shop for over 4 years. Part of my on-the-job training took place in what was called the heat treating department. There, 3 to 4 foot bars of metal as thick as my arm were placed in the white-hot blast furnaces where they were heated until the slag came to the surface. Slag is useless scum that forms on the surface of molten metal. This scum is composed of the foreign matter that makes the metal inferior. So if someone's called you slag before, it's not a compliment. Don't go home and call somebody slag you don't like, okay? That's mean. So it's foreign matter that makes the metal inferior or weaker. Once these impurities were removed, the soft, extremely extremely hot metal was formed and reshaped on huge presses as it went through the pounding of a series of hammers. Then it was heated again and dropped into vats of brine or oil. At that point, the hot metal screamed like an animal caught in a trap would scream, as it was being altered and tempered so that it could bear the beating that it was designed to take, or provide the support that it was designed to give. I'll read that last line again because that's appropriate for what we're talking about. As it was being altered and tempered so it could bear the beating that it was designed to take or provide the support that it was designed to give. So that's a very good metaphor of what we see happening with all of God's people throughout our lives, but especially people as important as Elijah. This is a harsh crucible that he's going to experience. So here's God's plan for Elijah. Even in this crucible that Elijah is in, God had not forgotten him. Had not forgotten him. We'll see how he comes through, and oftentimes it'll be the very last moment. But God has promised his people that he does not forget us. Isaiah 49 talks about how his people are engraved in the palms of his hands. We've seen that text before. And we see how the word of the Lord came to Isaiah in verse 8, the verses that we just read, to instruct them on where to go next. So if God's telling them to go somewhere, obviously he knows where he is, and he's going to keep an eye on them. Same thing is true for us. If we feel a lead or calling for God to direct us in one direction or another, we must trust that God's going to be there for us when we get there. So here's a couple of things to remember. Number one, God knows where Elijah is. He knows where he is. And it seems simple, but God knows where you are as well. God knows where you are. He's not lost you. So when we face times of anxiety, we can go to the God who said in Isaiah 41:10, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." If he knows where you are, that means he's going to be there with you. Number two, God knows where Elijah is going. We've talked about this a few times already. We don't know where we're going, right? We hope, we plan, we try to plan on where we're going to be, but we simply don't have that insight that God does. And we should be thankful that we don't. Imagine the worst things that have happened in your life to this point. Imagine having to expect those things for years and years in advance before they took place. It'd be overwhelming. God does know, and He is gracious enough to let us see forward one step at a time. And so this is what He's doing with Elijah, right? When He comes to him and He says to him in verse 8, arise, go to Zarephath, stay there. He's just telling him one step at a time the directions that He has in store for him. Now, if you've read the book of Elijah, you've kind of seen a little bit more ahead of what's going to happen. God doesn't tell him about, the child that's going to die that was born to this widow. And He's not going to tell him about the oil running out and things like that right now. He knows it's coming, but He's just saying to Elijah, go find this widow, and then you'll see what happens next. Okay? All right, Zarephath was at least 100 miles from where the Kerith Ravine was. 100 miles. It's a long journey that God is putting Elijah on to find this one person in this town. There's a lot of traveling in open territory. Remember, Elijah is a wanted man. You would imagine Ahab's looking for him by now, and Jezebel, and if they find him, it's not going to be pretty. And so it's easy for us to go through a time of testing. What's difficult is when we know that we're going to have to be in that time of testing for a while. So Elijah knows right now he's going to have to travel this long distance in this period of danger, and it's going to take an extended period of time for him. That's a test. That's a difficult thing for him to accomplish. He had to leave a place of security and do some dangerous traveling, but God has already promised that He prepared a place for him. God prepared a place for him. He mentioned that in verse 9 when He said, go to Zarephath. I don't think God would tell Elijah to go to Zarephath only to set him up for something to happen to him on the way. And so he looks to that instruction that God has given him, the calling, the direction that God has given him as reassurance that he's going to get there. And I think that's a good thing for us to see as an example as well. It was a humbling task for Elijah. What do you think was humbling about this for Elijah? Think about where he's going.
The unknown, I think, would be enough to humble you.
Sure, the unknown. You don't have much control over your circumstance, but there's something else too that God is asking Elijah to do that would be humbling for him.
He's gonna give up control or.
Yeah, so when he was sitting at the ravine, he had kind of his routine, probably felt like he had a little bit more control over his circumstance, and now his circumstance is kind of going up into an upheaval. But who is he depending on now? Not only God, but who else? A widow. In that time, a widow would be the least likely to be able to take care of it. And so Elijah, this great man of God who's gone into the throne room of King Ahab and told him, watch out, God's told me there's a drought coming, and it's not going to stop until I say it stops. This is the guy that God is saying, go find this woman who is a widow, and then He's going to rely on her to take care of him. This is intentionally a poor widow providing for Elijah, I think, is an intentional thing on God's part to help Elijah understand that it is God in control and He can work through any means he wants. A necessary part of God's refining process involves humbling tasks that we have to try to do with humility. So, when's the last time you've been humbled working for Jesus? If you haven't been lately, you need to do some work for Jesus because it's coming. That's the nature of this work that we've been called to, right? I mean, Jesus is the one who washed feet. And we're going to follow in the way that He's told us, or He's demonstrated for us, like He did in the upper room. So humility and doing a humbling task or relying on people that you didn't think you would have to rely on, those are things that God normally will do as He's refining people for the task that He has ahead of Him. So here are Elijah's tests. Number one, Elijah gets tested, and then this other blank is he responds with swift obedience. Swift obedience. We don't see any indication that Elijah talked back at all or asked any questions. He just got up and went. This is where we see it, his response in verse 10. He went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I might have a drink?" Keep in mind, he's walked 100 miles in a drought. He probably hasn't drank anything in a while. He's probably pretty desperate. As she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." So on Elijah's arrival, he encountered two tests. Number one, the test of first impressions. Elijah's likely dying of thirst. This brook has been dried up, right? It probably was dried up before he even left Zarephath. So he probably hadn't had a drink even at the beginning of the journey. Then he treks through the 100 miles. So he asked for water and bread. And here is the response from this woman. Verse 12. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son that we may eat it and die." She's in the process of doing what she thinks is preparing her last meal for herself and her child. First impression. Is this the person, God, you've got me going 100 miles to find? And here's this response. Have you ever been blindsided in this particular way, a first impression this way? This would have been probably a little bit disappointing for Elijah. Maybe you've been in circumstances like that where you kind of built yourself up for something that God has called you to do, and you get there and nobody cares what you're doing, or there's not the response that you thought would happen. And so this is the kind of emotion that I imagine Elijah's experiencing with this response from this woman that God sent him to find. I would imagine as he was thinking on this trip, he would have probably been picturing in his head, this widow was probably stockpiling the secret amount of all this bread, and like she has a zombie shelter somewhere, and it's got like canned goods stacked to the rafters, and that's if you're hungry and thirsty and you're walking that distance, that's what keeps you going. You think, okay, well, she's got a Walmart under her house, and that's going to be worth it. And he gets there, and he's on death's door probably with how thirsty he is, because that's the first thing he asked for. That's what he's thinking about, and that was her response. So that would have been a profound moment for Elijah, a profound test for him in his faith. So you have the test of first impressions, and then you have the test of physical impossibilities. Physical impossibilities. In order for anybody in this story so far to survive, the laws of nature need to be suspended, right? Because she said, I have a jar of flour and some oil, and I got just enough. I'm gathering sticks to make fire, to make bread, to die with. That's not going to take care of Elijah. So here's where it continues, verse 13. Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you've said. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. Then make something for yourself and your son." Now imagine how the widow is thinking, like responding to Elijah's request. Don't worry, it'll be there. First make some for me, then you'll have a lot more, right? This guy coming out of nowhere. I don't think she's expecting him at all, right? Doesn't seem like, there's no indication that God spoke to her and said, this prophet of God's going to come, you're going to have everything you need. No, it's just a strange, old, thirsty man walking up to her and making this strange request, okay? So we know from what Elijah's response is that he has still a tremendous amount of faith in God providing. Now, we know that he's already been through boot camp, right? So he's depended on God to show up for him with birds and all that. So in this circumstance, even though it might have been a great disappointment for him with that first impression, he probably very quickly thought, well, God's got something up his sleeve, and this is probably what's going to happen. And so with that kind of faith, this is the instruction that he gave to her. Verse 14, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. So he has insight, he's hearing this from God, somehow he has assurance that he's going to be taken care of all the way till the end of the drought. My guess is that insight didn't come until after Elijah had a chance to react to what the widow was saying. This is kind of how God's timing is, at least in my experience. You get to a point where you're like, this looks like a dead end, and it's kind of like the opposite of Roadrunner, where it looks like a road and it's a dead end. You know, for us, it looks like a dead end and it's actually a road. I guess that would be Coyote. Coyote's the one that always runs into the wall. So Elijah stands up to this trial here, and he gets this assurance from God. Now we're going to see how the widow's going to respond here. The widow had her eyes on the impossibilities, and Elijah was focused on what was possible. This was a definite sign that Elijah was an emerging man of God. Like I said, I think it's probably because of his experience of the character being that he was able to have this kind of faith in God taking care of him. And so he's reaching into his bag of experience with God, and he's pulling out assurance and faith. And you can hear some confidence in Elijah's words as he assures this widow that not only will God take care of him, but take care of her as well. So notice how God is using each of them to build each other's faith. This isn't just a widow who's there for Elijah. This is Elijah there for this widow. God had mercy on this woman and this child, and he will a couple times over. But it is a very last-minute response, and I think both of them needed each other in order to survive, and God made it that way. This is why church exists. There's some things in your life that you will be spared of if you have the humility to ask for help from someone else in church who can help you. But you will not be spared of it if you rely on yourself. This is the situation Elijah and this widow was in. Had the widow said, "You're crazy, I got this one meal, leave me alone, we're going to have a waffle and die," then they would have died probably, you know? Or had Elijah said, "God, this is a poor widow, and she just told me that she doesn't have enough to take care of me. I'm sorry, you must have the wrong town," and kept walking, Elijah would not have made it through either. They had to have each other. And God does this. This is how he works. He works in a way that creates dependency on us, because we all like to be, especially as strong Americans, we like to be independent, self-sufficient, and not have to rely on others. But this is what it leads us to sometimes, this dependency that is, in the end, a good thing. And the kind of relationship that will form, the way that they are taking care of one another is a beautiful and profound thing that can only happen through a circumstance like this. And the widow was probably never the same after this encounter, as is in the notes. So, just like Elijah, when she's told to go and do, she goes and does. She does the right thing. She responds positively. And in the midst of the crucible, Elijah and the widow obeyed, and God provided a miracle. This was the overcoming of the physical impossibilities that existed in their circumstance. Here's the miracle, verse 15. She went away, did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. So the widow of Zarephath met God in the kitchen. Take that, Martha Stewart. That's the best cooking show I've ever seen. You just come back to this jar and it just keeps getting full, and I pull more out and it's full. And so I would have loved to see that cooking show. You could hear it probably from the kitchen every morning. The doxology. Praise God from whom all biscuits flow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That was a bad preach. I'll leave that to Donna from now on. So they probably didn't have bacon and ham and all that stuff. They didn't have probably everything. Well, they wouldn't have eaten the bacon and ham. Man, I feel bad for Jewish folks for breakfast. Like, that's the only... Steak and eggs, maybe. Well done. Couldn't be better at all. But they didn't have all that. They didn't have everything they may have wanted, but they certainly had what they needed. God provided miraculously to help them that way. So here are 4 principles to ponder as we close it up. Number 1, God's leading is often surprising. We've seen that a few times. Don't analyze it. And this is something else too. Like, we oftentimes have some type of a breakthrough like this where we trust God, He comes through, then we try to reproduce it, right? It's like, well, I really needed, let's say, money for a car payment, and then it just came in the mail. So I'm just going to wait next month and see if it comes in the mail again, right? This is not the way it goes, right? So you don't try to analyze it, reproduce it, control it. This is kind of our tendency. God does what He does in surprising ways, and they're going to stay surprising. So it's not something we can predict. And a lot of times His leading is often, at least looking forward, is illogical. It's like, I would have done it differently. I would have made more sense if we did it this way. And the reason why it seems illogical to us is because we just don't have the big picture that God has. So don't analyze it. Number 2, the beginning days are often the hardest days, but don't quit. The scariest time is the very beginning of the struggle. Because even if God comes through, you're pretty much guaranteed to expect God to come through later. Right? So you're going to go through some hard time or some struggle or some fear, unexpected things. But you keep going. You don't quit. The first impression blues that Elijah had are real. They happen all the time for us in circumstances that we hope can be different from what we encounter. But confidence in God is contagious. I think Elijah's confidence in God taking care of them helped the widow trust God, right? So if you're going through a circumstance, especially if it's a circumstance that other people are going through with you, you leading in confidence in that, trusting God through that, can help other people around you as well. So they may be hard days in the beginning, but don't quit, and staying in there with confidence. The third thing is God's promises often hinge on obedience. Don't ignore your part. As we just talked about, any one of those, either one of the widow or Elijah, had they not been obedient in that circumstance, it would have been disastrous for both of them. Maybe God would have led Elijah to another person or something, but they both needed to be faithful in order for that situation to have worked out. So when promises have conditions, our obedience precedes God's provision. When promises have conditions, our obedience precedes God's provision. God's not going to respond in the way you desire until you first are obedient toward Him. Unless He decides to have grace on you, which He does that as well. Fourth thing, God's provisions are often just enough. Don't fail to thank Him. So, we always have a desire, like, God, will you please send down cows that I can use for steaks? And instead, you get ravens bringing bread. May not be the job you wanted, but you have a job, right? So those are the kind of things that we look at when we are thankful for. And grateful contentment is a rare thing, especially in our culture. So remind your kids of that on Christmas morning. 'Tis the season for that. On the Christian journey from faith to maturity, all roads pass through Zarephath. all of us mature through circumstances similar to what Elijah has experienced. So think about times in your life, and maybe you already have, where you have gone through a difficult time that required you to place faith in God or God's people, but yet He came through. And those will be the times that will help you as the next trials come along. And as long as we are breathing air on this planet, the potential for the next trial is there. But God will always be with us as long as we're following where He's calling us. Okay? That's that. We'll get together next week and talk a little bit more about the relationship that Elijah had with his widow and her child, and more miracles to come. Speaking of miracles, let's be praying for some things today and through the week as we are keeping up with how everybody's doing here. As Steve mentioned, Louise is home, thankfully, and recovering, so we're praying that she will continue to heal. And reach out to her if you think of it. Phone call or visit, but call ahead. Would be a great encouragement to her.
Don't call me, call her.
Is it address for her if we want to send her cards?
Yeah. Steve will give you an address if you'd like to send. Yes.
I almost made the contest today because it's also a prayer concern, but I think we need to pray for people that get run over by golf carts.
My guess is Greg has something to do with it.
Greg got ran over by a golf cart last week.
As much as he's on the golf course,
Yes.
the odds increase. You know.
Not a
So,
reindeer, guys, not a reindeer.
you mean this is the first time you've been run over by a golf? Wow.
Hopefully the last.
Mm.
And then you had darkness.
I guess there's a story there, right?
Yeah. He got ran over by a golf cart.
Oh, oh.
Yeah.